Sarah Mitchell stood frozen in her kitchen, her trembling hands barely able to hold the official envelope that had arrived just moments ago. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the granite countertop, but nothing could warm the ice that had suddenly flooded through her veins. She had known something was coming. Marcus had been distant lately, cold in their phone conversations about Emma, but she never could have imagined this. Never. The papers were crisp, official, bearing the seal of the Portland family court. Her eyes scanned the words over and over again, hoping they would somehow change, transform into something less devastating. But they didn't. They remained the same, brutal and unforgiving. Marcus Thompson was petitioning for full custody of their daughter Emma, citing Sarah as mentally unstable, chronically negligent, and unfit to provide adequate maternal care. The words felt like physical blows, each one landing harder than the last. Sarah's legs gave out, and she collapsed into the nearest chair. She read through the attached statement from Patricia Davies, Marcus's girlfriend whom Sarah had never particularly liked but had always tried to be civil toward. Patricia's words were calculated and vicious. She described witnessing Emma left alone in the house while Sarah supposedly lay in bed for hours, claiming Sarah had screamed profanities at her daughter over minor spills, alleging that Sarah had been intoxicated during pickup times from daycare. Every single accusation was a complete fabrication, yet they were written with such convincing detail that Sarah's stomach twisted with dread. The truth was the complete opposite. Sarah had built her entire life around Emma. When Marcus had wanted nothing to do with parenting, when he'd told Sarah he wasn't ready for a child and suggested she have an abortion, Sarah had made the choice to have her baby alone. She'd worked 3 jobs during her pregnancy to save money. She delivered Emma in the hospital while Marcus sat in the waiting room, refusing to come into the delivery room. And then, when he'd miraculously decided he wanted to be involved, after Emma turned 2, Sarah had welcomed him with open arms, believing he'd finally grown up and wanted to be a real father. Instead, he'd used those 2 years to observe Sarah's routines, her vulnerabilities, and now he was weaponizing her love for Emma against her. Sarah pulled out her phone with shaking fingers and called her lawyer, Elizabeth Chen, a woman in her 50s with steely gray eyes and a reputation for being ruthless in the courtroom. Elizabeth had helped her navigate the initial custody arrangement 3 years ago, and she'd warned Sarah then that Marcus might try something like this. "Never underestimate what people will do when they feel threatened," Elizabeth had said at the time. "Elizabeth, he's filed," Sarah said, her voice cracking. "He's filing for full custody. He's saying I'm an unfit mother. There's a statement from his girlfriend." "Slow down," Elizabeth interrupted, her tone shifting to professional mode. "Tell me everything, start from the beginning." Sarah explained everything, the accusations, Patricia's supposed witness statements, the timeline of incidents that never happened. As she spoke, she found herself defensive, almost angry, explaining why each accusation was false. But even as she articulated her innocence, a terrible fear began to grip her. In family court, it wasn't always about the truth. It was about who could tell the most convincing story. "How much contact has Marcus had with Emma?" Elizabeth asked. "He gets her every other weekend. Sometimes he takes her for a week during the summer. But Elizabeth, he's never been hands-on. I'm the one who knows her schedule, her favorite foods, her bedtime routine, everything. I've sacrificed everything for her." "That might work against you," Elizabeth said quietly. "Courts sometimes view primary caregivers as controlling. We need to be strategic here. The fact that his girlfriend is willing to testify is problematic. Even if she's lying, her testimony will carry weight if we can't directly contradict it." Sarah's heart sank deeper. "So what do we do?" "We need solid evidence, documentation. We need to show a pattern of Marcus being uninvolved, of you being consistently present and caring. We need medical records showing Emma is healthy, happy, well-adjusted. We need teacher evaluations from her daycare. We need character witnesses willing to testify about your parenting. And most importantly, we need to find inconsistencies in Patricia's statement. If she's lying, there will be holes. They always leave holes. After the call ended, Sarah sat in silence for a long time. The house was quiet. Emma was at daycare until 5 o'clock. Sarah had used that time to work from home, splitting her attention between her job as a graphic designer and keeping one ear open for any emails or calls from the daycare. It was a delicate balance she'd perfected over 3 years, a balance that allowed her to be both a provider and a present mother. She walked to Emma's bedroom, a small space painted in soft yellow with white clouds on the ceiling that Sarah had painted herself when she was 7 months pregnant. Stuffed animals lined the shelves, organized by color, something Emma had insisted on just last week. Sarah touched the small bed where she and Emma read stories every single night before sleep, where they cuddled on weekend mornings, where Sarah had sung countless lullabies to soothe her daughter's fears. The thought of not waking up in this house with Emma was unbearable. The thought of Emma spending nights somewhere else, asking for her mother, confused and hurt, it made Sarah's chest constrict with physical pain. That night, Sarah sat across from Emma at the dinner table, watching her daughter eat spaghetti with the kind of messy joy only 3-year-olds could achieve. Emma talked about her day at daycare. She'd painted a picture of their family. She'd played with blocks. She'd made a new friend named Tommy. Emma's eyes sparkled as she recounted these simple, beautiful moments, completely unaware that her world was about to shake. Sarah realized with horrifying clarity that Marcus and Patricia were counting on exactly this: Emma's innocence, her inability to distinguish truth from coached lies. Children were malleable, suggestible. If Marcus had her for extended periods, if he and Patricia worked together, they could potentially reshape Emma's memories, plant false narratives about her mother. That night after Emma fell asleep, Sarah sat in the dark living room and cried. Not quiet tears, but deep, racking sobs that came from the deepest part of her soul. She had done everything right. She had loved her daughter with every fiber of her being. She had sacrificed her own happiness, her own future, her own dreams to give Emma the best possible life. And now, because of her ex-boyfriend's ego and his manipulative girlfriend's willingness to lie under oath, everything could be taken away. The court date was 14 days away. 14 days to somehow prove the unprovable, to fight against accusations that were designed to sound plausible, to save her relationship with her daughter. Sarah looked out at the dark street and made herself a promise. She would not lose Emma. She would fight with every ounce of strength she possessed. She would expose these lies, and she would make sure that Emma knew, without any doubt, that her mother loved her more than anything in this world. But as the night stretched on, Sarah couldn't shake the terrible fear that whispered in the back of her mind. What if love wasn't enough? 3 days before the custody hearing, Sarah found herself sitting in her car outside the courthouse, trying to gather the courage to go inside for a preliminary meeting with her lawyer. The gray Portland sky hung heavy above her, threatening rain, and Sarah felt like the weather was a reflection of her internal state, dark, turbulent, and unpredictable. She had barely slept in the past 72 hours, her mind spinning with worst-case scenarios and desperate strategies to prove her innocence. Elizabeth had asked her to come early to review the case files one more time, to go over her testimony, to prepare for the emotional gauntlet she was about to endure. Sarah had arranged for Emma to stay with her mother, Margaret, for the day. Her own mother had been her rock through this nightmare, offering unwavering support and fierce protection of her granddaughter. Margaret had even offered to testify in court about Sarah's parenting abilities, having witnessed firsthand how devoted Sarah was to Emma. Sarah pushed open the car door and stepped into the crisp autumn air. The courthouse was an imposing structure of stone and glass, intimidating in its grandeur. She had been here before for the initial custody arrangement, but that felt different. That had been about establishing a routine with an already somewhat absent father. This was about survival, about proving she deserved to keep her own child. As Sarah climbed the courthouse steps, she decided to grab a coffee from the small cafe on the corner before heading up to Elizabeth's office. The cafe was busy with the usual lunch crowd, and Sarah had to squeeze past several people to reach the counter. That's when she heard a familiar voice laugh, a voice that made her blood run cold. "I'm telling you, this is going to be so easy," Patricia Davies said, her voice dripping with confidence and cruel amusement. She was sitting at a small table in the corner with two friends, completely unaware that Sarah was frozen just 10 feet away, partially hidden behind a tall display of pastries. Sarah's hand instinctively moved to cover her mouth, her breathing becoming shallow. Every instinct screamed at her to turn around and leave, but something darker, more desperate kept her rooted to the spot. She had to hear this. She had to know what Patricia was planning. "Marcus is so stupid," one of Patricia's friends giggled. "He actually thinks the judge is going to believe all of this." Patricia's expression turned serious and she leaned forward conspiratorially. "The judge will believe it because I know how to make it believable. I've done this before, remember. This isn't my first custody case. I know exactly what to say, how to say it, what to wear, how to cry at the right moments. Courts eat that stuff up." Sarah felt like she might faint. She gripped the edge of the pastry display, her knuckles turning white. "But what about the kid?" the second friend asked. "Won't she say something to contradict you?" Patricia's smile was predatory, almost evil. Sarah had never seen this side of her before. She'd always seemed pleasant if somewhat superficial. But now, with her friends, she was revealing her true nature, and it was far more sinister than Sarah could have imagined. "That's the beauty of it," Patricia continued, stirring her coffee slowly. "Emma is only 3 years old. 3-year-olds are incredibly suggestible. Marcus has been working on her for months, asking her leading questions, planting ideas in her head about her mother being mean or scary. He's subtle about it, very subtle. And when he gets full custody, which he will because of my testimony, we'll have even more time to reshape her entire narrative. That little girl will believe whatever we tell her to believe. She'll think her mother was abusive. She'll think her own memories are wrong. By the time she's older, she won't even remember the truth." Sarah's entire body went numb. The world seemed to tilt around her. They weren't just planning to take Emma away. They were planning to psychologically manipulate her daughter, to poison her mind against her own mother, to create false memories and distorted perceptions of reality in a 3-year-old child's innocent brain. "What if Sarah fights back?" one friend asked. "What if she has evidence or witnesses?" Patricia waved her hand dismissively. "Sarah's a pushover. She's going to be so emotionally destroyed by the accusations that she won't be able to mount any real defense. And even if she tries, it's her word against mine, and I'm far more credible. I'm sleeping with the father. I'm a concerned witness trying to help a child. I've got the narrative locked down. Sarah's just a desperate mother who will probably cry in court and make herself look unstable. Marcus specifically wanted someone like me for this. Someone with no connection to him that would make the allegations seem impartial." Sarah backed away slowly, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. She made it to the bathroom and locked herself in a stall, where she finally allowed herself to fall apart. She sobbed silently, her hand pressed against her mouth to muffle the sounds. Everything she'd feared was true and worse. They didn't just want custody. They wanted to destroy her relationship with Emma entirely. They wanted to brainwash her daughter into believing her own mother was a monster. When Sarah finally pulled herself together, her hands were shaking so violently that she could barely hold her phone. She called Elizabeth immediately. "I'm at the courthouse," Elizabeth said. "Are you coming up?" "I need to see you right now," Sarah whispered urgently. "I overheard something terrible, something that proves they're lying. Can you meet me in the parking garage?" 20 minutes later, Sarah sat in Elizabeth's car in the courthouse parking garage, recounting everything she'd heard. She watched as her lawyer's expression transformed from concern to controlled fury. "Did anyone see you?" Elizabeth asked sharply. "No, I was completely hidden. They had no idea I was there." Elizabeth was quiet for a long moment, her fingers drumming against the steering wheel. "This is good. This is actually very good. What you heard proves consciousness of guilt, proves they're planning to manipulate Emma. But here's the problem, we can't use it as evidence. What? Sarah felt her hope crumble. Why not? You just heard me describe it. Because you obtained that information by eavesdropping without their knowledge or consent. It's not admissible in court. In fact, if we try to use it, Patricia's lawyer will argue that we're invading her privacy and could potentially turn this against us, making you look desperate and unstable. Sarah felt like screaming. So they can plan to destroy my daughter, and I can't do anything about it. I didn't say that, Elizabeth said carefully. What we do is we use this information strategically. We now know exactly what they're planning, which means we can prepare for it. We can anticipate their lies, we can prepare counterarguments, we can gather evidence that directly contradicts their narrative. We can also dig deeper into Patricia's background. If she's done this before, there might be evidence of it. We might find other victims, other cases where she fabricated testimony. But Marcus is going to get custody anyway, Sarah said bitterly. He's going to take Emma away and then they're going to brainwash her. They told you they're going to reshape her entire reality. Not if we're smarter than they are, Elizabeth said, her voice turning steely. And not if we can get Emma to speak the truth before they have the chance to fully manipulate her. A 3-year-old might be suggestible, but genuine memories are powerful. Genuine love is powerful. The bond between a mother and daughter, that's the strongest evidence we have. That night, Sarah lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. She thought about Emma sleeping peacefully in the next room, completely unaware of the psychological warfare being waged around her. She thought about Marcus, about how she'd once loved him, about how she'd tried so hard to co-parent with him despite his initial rejection of their daughter. And she made a decision. She would fight, not just for herself but for Emma. She would expose these lies, she would protect her daughter from psychological manipulation, and she would make sure that the truth, the real, genuine, beautiful truth about their relationship, was heard in that courtroom. But as dawn broke over Portland, Sarah couldn't shake the terrifying reality. They had 14 days until trial, and they were running out of time to stop a carefully orchestrated plan to destroy her family. The alarm on Sarah's phone buzzed at 6:15 a.m., pulling her from a restless sleep filled with nightmares and anxiety dreams. She had finally dozed off around 4 a.m., her mind exhausted but her body still tense with the stress of the impending court date. Today was the day. After 2 weeks of preparation, investigation, and emotional turmoil, Sarah would finally stand before a judge and fight for her daughter's future. She lay in bed for a moment, staring at the ceiling, gathering every ounce of courage she could muster. The house was still dark and quiet. Sarah had chosen to wake early, knowing that the day ahead would demand everything from her. She needed time to center herself, to prepare mentally for the ordeal of sitting in a courtroom while strangers dissected her parenting, her character, and her fitness as a mother. She pulled herself out of bed, her muscles aching from the tension she'd been carrying for weeks. Sarah moved quietly through the hallway to Emma's room. Her daughter was sleeping peacefully, her small body curled up under a white comforter decorated with cartoon rabbits. Emma's blonde hair spread across her pillow, and one of her stuffed animals, a well-worn teddy bear named Mr. Snuggles, was clutched tightly in her small arms. Sarah stood in the doorway for a long moment, just watching her daughter sleep. This face, this innocent, beautiful face, was what she was fighting for. This was why she couldn't afford to lose. Sarah knew that today would be confusing and frightening for Emma. The child didn't fully understand what was happening, despite Sarah's attempts to explain in age-appropriate terms that there was a meeting with the judge today. Sarah had been incredibly careful not to poison Emma against her father. Despite Marcus's cruelty towards Sarah, he was still Emma's father, and Sarah believed that children deserved to have loving relationships with both parents, even when those parents were no longer together. But she also knew, from what she'd overheard in the courthouse cafe, that Marcus and Patricia were planning to manipulate Emma, to plant false memories, to reshape her understanding of her own mother. That knowledge burned in Sarah's chest like acid. She returned to her own bedroom and stood under a hot shower for 20 minutes, letting the water cascade over her shoulders. She tried to wash away the anxiety, the fear, the overwhelming sense of helplessness that had plagued her for weeks. The water couldn't wash it away, of course. Fear didn't work that way. Fear was persistent, insidious, burrowing deep into the core of your being and refusing to release its grip. Sarah dried off and looked at herself in the mirror. She had lost weight over the past 2 weeks. Her collarbones were more prominent than usual, her cheekbones more angular. Dark circles hung beneath her eyes like badges of her suffering. She looked like exactly what she was, a terrified mother fighting for her life. She applied makeup carefully, choosing neutral tones that would make her look calm and composed, the opposite of unstable or erratic. Elizabeth had been very specific about her appearance, nothing too flashy, nothing that could be misconstrued. Professional, put together but not cold. A woman who cared deeply about her appearance for her own self-respect, not because she was vain or self-absorbed. At 7:30 a.m., Sarah went to wake Emma. She kept her voice light and cheerful, refusing to let her own anxiety bleed into her interaction with her daughter. "Good morning, baby girl," Sarah said softly, gently stroking Emma's hair. "Time to wake up. We have a big day today." Emma stirred slowly, her eyes opening with that drowsy confusion that all young children have upon waking. She looked at her mother and smiled, her entire face brightening. That smile, innocent, trusting, full of unconditional love, nearly broke Sarah's heart. "Mommy," Emma said, reaching her arms up to be lifted. Sarah obliged, pulling her daughter close and breathing in the sweet, clean scent of her hair. She held Emma for longer than usual, memorizing the feeling of her small body in her arms, the weight of her, the warmth of her. "Do you remember what we're doing today?" Sarah asked gently. Emma nodded solemnly. "We're going to see the judge man, you told me." "That's right. The judge man is going to ask us some questions, and you're going to tell him the truth, okay? Just like we practiced." "Okay, Mommy," Emma said, her little voice serious. "Why do we have to see the judge man?" Sarah swallowed hard. How do you explain to a 3-year-old that her father was trying to take her away? How do you explain human cruelty and manipulation to a child who had only ever known love? "Because sometimes grown-ups have to ask a judge to help them make decisions," Sarah said carefully. "And today, the judge is going to help us make a decision about where you're going to live and when you'll see Daddy. And the judge just wants to make sure you're happy and safe." "I'm happy when I'm with you," Emma said matter-of-factly, her child's logic cutting through all the legal complexity. "Can the judge know that?" "Yes, baby, I think the judge will know that." They dressed Emma in a simple pink dress with white tights and black Mary Jane shoes. Sarah had specifically chosen this outfit. It made Emma look adorable and innocent without being theatrical. They ate a light breakfast together, scrambled eggs and toast, though Sarah could barely choke down a few bites. Her stomach was in knots. At 8:45 a.m., Sarah's phone rang. It was her mother. "How are you holding up?" Margaret asked, her voice steady and supportive. "I'm terrified," Sarah admitted. "What if I cry? What if I break down on the stand? Elizabeth said that could make me look unstable." "Then you'll cry," Margaret said firmly. "You're a human being fighting for your daughter. If tears come, they come. They're evidence of how much you love her, not evidence of instability." After hanging up with her mother, Sarah and Emma made the drive to the courthouse. The morning traffic was moderate, and the drive gave Sarah time to think, to pray, to prepare herself mentally. Emma chattered about inconsequential things, a bird she saw, a song from her daycare, whether clouds were made of water. Sarah answered all her daughter's questions while simultaneously running through her testimony in her head, going over the facts, the timeline, the evidence. As they pulled into the courthouse parking lot, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Elizabeth. "We're ready. Come up to my office. We need to talk strategy one more time before we go in." Sarah took Emma's hand and walked toward the imposing courthouse building. The stone structure seemed to loom over them, a monument to justice and truth. Or at least, she hoped it was a monument to truth. She had to believe that the legal system, despite its flaws and biases, would ultimately recognize genuine love and maternal devotion when confronted with it. As they climbed the courthouse steps, Sarah felt Emma's small hand gripping hers tightly. Her daughter was nervous too, sensing somehow the importance of the day. Sarah squeezed her hand gently. "We're going to be okay," Sarah whispered, trying to convince both of them. "No matter what happens, you and I are going to be okay." But even as she said the words, doubt gnawed at her. What if they weren't okay? What if today marked the beginning of the end of her relationship with her daughter? What if, despite all her efforts, all her love, all her sacrifice, she lost Emma to Marcus and Patricia's lies? Sarah pushed those thoughts down as they entered the courthouse. She had to focus. She had to be strong. She had to believe that truth would prevail. As they reached the elevator, a security guard stopped them. "Ma'am, you'll need to go through security first," he said, gesturing toward the metal detectors. Sarah nodded and guided Emma through the security checkpoint. As they waited to be cleared, Sarah noticed something unusual at the far end of the hallway. An officer in a crisp uniform was standing with an absolutely magnificent German Shepherd at his side. The dog was enormous, with a sleek black and tan coat that gleamed under the fluorescent lights. The animal's bearing was calm and dignified, almost regal. Emma's eyes went wide. "Mommy, look," she whispered, tugging at Sarah's sleeve. "A doggy." For the first time in weeks, Sarah saw something other than fear in her daughter's eyes. She saw wonder. She saw joy. She saw the simple, pure happiness of a 3-year-old discovering something beautiful and unexpected. The officer noticed Emma's gaze and smiled warmly. He began walking toward them, the dog moving in perfect synchronization with his steps. "Hello there," the officer said kindly, kneeling down to Emma's eye level. "My name is Officer James Chen and this is Duke. Would you like to pet him?" Emma looked at her mother for permission. Sarah nodded, and Emma reached out hesitantly, running her small hand along Duke's soft fur. The German Shepherd's tail wagged gently, and he leaned into the child's touch as if he understood exactly how much she needed this moment of connection and comfort. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. In that moment, she didn't know why this officer and his dog were here, but she felt like the universe had sent her a gift. A sign that maybe, just maybe, things would work out. "Officer Chen," Sarah said softly, "why are you here?" Officer Chen smiled, and there was something in his expression that suggested he understood far more than Sarah had told him. The judge approved a comfort animal for this hearing. Emma here looked like she could use some support. Duke and I are here to help. As Emma continued to stroke Duke's fur, her anxiety visibly melting away, Sarah felt something shift inside her chest. It was hope. Fragile, tentative, but present nonetheless. Today was going to be the hardest day of her life. But somehow, standing in a courthouse hallway with her daughter's hand in hers and a calm, protective German Shepherd beside them, Sarah felt a little bit stronger. The courtroom was colder than Sarah expected. A sterile space of wood paneling, worn carpet, and the overwhelming presence of institutional authority. Judge Harold Morrison sat elevated behind his bench, his silver hair and reading glasses giving him an appearance of both wisdom and unyielding judgment. Sarah felt the weight of his gaze as she entered, as if he were already forming opinions about her character based solely on how she walked, how she carried herself, how she appeared to the world. Emma sat beside Sarah in the gallery section, her small legs dangling from the wooden bench. Officer Chen had walked them to the courtroom entrance, and Duke had remained just outside in the hallway, a comforting presence that Emma could glance toward if she needed reassurance. Sarah had squeezed Officer Chen's arm before entering, silently thanking him for his inexplicable kindness. Elizabeth sat at the prosecution table, or rather, the custody petitioner's table, arranging her files with practiced precision. She glanced back at Sarah and gave a subtle nod of encouragement. Across the room, Marcus sat with his attorney, a slick man named David Hornsby who had a reputation for winning custody cases through aggressive cross-examination and character assassination. Patricia Davies sat directly behind Marcus, dressed in a conservative blue dress that made her look wholesome and trustworthy. She looked nothing like the predatory woman Sarah had overheard in the courthouse cafe. The judge banged his gavel once, a sharp sound that echoed through the courtroom and made Emma jump slightly. Sarah reached over and placed a reassuring hand on her daughter's knee. "We're here today regarding the custody petition filed by Marcus Thompson against Sarah Mitchell," Judge Morrison said, his voice deep and authoritative. "This court will hear arguments from both parties and will render a decision based on the best interests of the child involved. Let's begin with the petitioner's opening statement." David Hornsby stood smoothly, buttoning his jacket as he approached the bench. He was polished, practiced, every movement calculated to project confidence and credibility. "Your Honor, this case is about protecting a child from an unstable environment," Hornsby began, his voice carrying a tone of concerned sincerity. "The evidence will show that Sarah Mitchell, while perhaps well-intentioned, is emotionally volatile, prone to neglectful behavior, and incapable of providing the stable, nurturing environment that young Emma deserves. We have testimony from a concerned witness who has directly observed troubling patterns of behavior. We also have documentation of Ms. Mitchell's concerning mental health history. My client, Marcus Thompson, is seeking custody not out of spite or vindictiveness, but out of genuine concern for his daughter's well-being." Sarah's hands clenched into fists beneath the table. Mental health history. She'd never had any serious mental health issues. She'd seen a therapist once after her breakup with Marcus, completely normal grief counseling, nothing that could be construed as evidence of instability. "We will demonstrate through clear and compelling testimony that Emma would be better served living primarily with her father, in a more structured and stable home environment," Hornsby continued. "Thank you, Your Honor." He sat down with the satisfaction of a man who believed he'd already won. Then Marcus took the stand. He was calm, measured, and heartbreakingly effective. He wore a dark suit and had styled his hair perfectly. He spoke about his love for Emma with what sounded like genuine emotion, though Sarah knew better. She'd heard him on the phone countless times, putting off visits with Emma because of work, because of other priorities, because he simply wasn't interested. "When Emma was born, I wasn't ready," Marcus said, his voice wavering slightly with what appeared to be regret. "I was young, immature. I wasn't there for Sarah the way I should have been. But I've grown up. I've matured. And over the past few years, I've realized that I want to be a real father to Emma. I want to provide her with stability, with structure, with the kind of home environment that I didn't have growing up." He paused, allowing the judge to process his words, to form sympathy for this man who claimed to be seeking redemption through fatherhood. "But I've become increasingly concerned about Emma's emotional well-being," Marcus continued. "I've noticed behavioral changes. She seems anxious when I pick her up. She's mentioned things that worry me, things that suggest Sarah might not be treating her well when they're alone together. I would never have pursued this action if I didn't genuinely believe Emma's welfare was at stake." It was a masterclass in manipulation. Every word was designed to plant seeds of doubt about Sarah's character while simultaneously making Marcus appear noble and concerned. Sarah felt her attorney's hand touch her arm, a subtle reminder to stay calm, to not react visibly. Then came the cross-examination. Elizabeth was sharp and precise, asking Marcus about his inconsistent visitation schedule, about the times he'd canceled on Emma, about his failure to contribute adequately to her medical and educational expenses. Marcus remained unflappable, explaining each inconsistency away with plausible excuses: work conflicts, unexpected complications, financial difficulties that were now resolved. "Mr. Thompson, isn't it true that when Emma was born, You told Ms. Mitchell you didn't want to be involved in the child's life," Elizabeth asked directly. "That was a difficult time," Marcus replied smoothly. "I was scared. I wasn't mature enough to handle the responsibility, but I've changed." "Have you undergone any psychological counseling or therapy to address your previous reluctance toward parenthood?" "No, but—" "No therapy. Yet you're asking this court to believe you've fundamentally changed your personality and priorities. Is that correct?" "People can change without therapy," Marcus said, his tone becoming slightly defensive. "I've simply matured through lived experience." Sarah watched as Elizabeth made notes, building her case piece by piece. But even as her attorney worked, Sarah could see the judge's expression. He was taking Marcus seriously. He was considering the possibility that Sarah might indeed be an unfit mother. Then Patricia took the stand. She was brilliant, absolutely brilliant in her deception. She wore minimal makeup, had her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, and spoke in a soft, measured voice that conveyed genuine concern mixed with reluctance, as if she really didn't want to be there, as if the weight of protecting a child had forced her to speak up despite her discomfort with being a witness. "I've known Emma since she was about 2.5 years old," Patricia began, her eyes appearing slightly wet with unshed tears. "I love that little girl like she's my own, and because I love her, I have to tell the truth about what I've witnessed." She then proceeded to lie with remarkable conviction. She described seeing Sarah leave Emma alone in the house for extended periods. She claimed to have witnessed Sarah speaking harshly to Emma over minor accidents. She suggested, in carefully chosen words, that Sarah might have substance abuse issues, mentioning times when Sarah's speech seemed slurred and her demeanor erratic, none of which had ever happened. Each lie was specific enough to sound credible, vague enough to be difficult to disprove. Patricia's performance was so convincing that Sarah could see the judge leaning forward, listening intently, taking detailed notes. "Ms. Davies, have you ever reported these concerns to Child Protective Services?" Elizabeth asked during cross-examination. "I wanted to," Patricia said, her voice trembling. But Marcus felt it might be better to handle it through the courts, to try to keep Emma with her father in a more positive way, rather than exposing her to the trauma of a CPS investigation. It was the perfect answer, one that made Patricia appear protective and thoughtful rather than callous or vindictive. "And you have no personal interest in Mr. Thompson, no romantic relationship?" Patricia hesitated, just slightly, just enough to seem like she was uncomfortable admitting something personal. "Marcus and I have become close over the past year. We care about each other, but my testimony here isn't about our relationship. It's about Emma's safety." The lie was so perfectly constructed that Sarah felt physically ill. Patricia was claiming to have observed all these incidents while simultaneously building a romantic relationship with Marcus, yet somehow maintaining the moral authority to report his ex-girlfriend's unstable parenting. As Patricia stepped down from the stand, looking shaken and emotional, Sarah leaned over to Elizabeth and whispered desperately, "She's winning. The judge believes her." Elizabeth's expression was grim. "I know. We need something concrete. We need something that directly contradicts her testimony." The morning session ended with both attorneys preparing their closing arguments for the afternoon. Sarah sat in the courthouse cafe with Elizabeth, staring at a sandwich she couldn't bring herself to eat. Emma was with her grandmother in a separate waiting area, away from the stress of the courtroom. "What can we do?" Sarah asked desperately. "She's lying so convincingly. The judge is clearly believing her." "We need Emma to speak the truth," Elizabeth said quietly. "Children have an innocence that can cut through lies. If Emma can articulate what really happens between her and you, if she can express her genuine feelings about her relationship with her mother, that could counterbalance Patricia's testimony." "But she's only 3, Sarah said. "She might get confused under pressure. She might say something that sounds bad even if it's not. and Marcus and Patricia have been working on her, planting ideas in her head." "I know," Elizabeth said. "But right now, Emma is our only hope, because everything else, our character witnesses, our evidence, our arguments, it's all circumstantial. Patricia's accusations are specific and detailed. We need something equally specific and detailed, but from the opposite direction. We need Emma to tell the judge that her mother loves her, that her mother is good to her, that she's safe and happy." As they prepared to return to the courtroom for the afternoon session, Sarah felt the weight of the situation press down on her even more heavily. Her 3-year-old daughter was about to become the central figure in a custody battle, forced to navigate questions and accusations in a sterile courtroom, potentially saying things that could be misinterpreted or used against her. Sarah glanced toward the hallway, where she could see Officer Chen and Duke waiting quietly. The dog's calm presence was somehow the only thing keeping her grounded in reality. The afternoon session was about to begin. Marcus and Patricia's lies had been told. Now it was time for the truth to fight back if it could. The afternoon session began with renewed intensity. Elizabeth stood and called her first witness, Sarah's mother, Margaret Chen. She was composed and articulate, describing in vivid detail the countless hours she'd spent observing Sarah's interactions with Emma. She testified about Sarah's sacrifice, her dedication, her unwavering commitment to Emma's well-being. She spoke about the bedtime routines, the constant presence, the way Sarah organized her entire life around her daughter's needs. But even as Margaret testified beautifully, Sarah could see the judge's expression remained unmoved. Patricia's testimony had created a narrative that was difficult to dislodge, and a grandmother's testimony, while touching, could be dismissed as biased loyalty. Elizabeth called Emma's daycare teacher next, a woman named Mrs. Rodriguez who had been with Emma since she was 18 months old. Mrs. Rodriguez spoke about Emma's emotional stability, her social skills, her apparent comfort and security. She described a child who showed no signs of abuse or neglect, a child who was well-adjusted and happy. "Has Emma ever mentioned anything troubling about her home life with her mother?" Elizabeth asked. "Never," Mrs. Rodriguez said firmly. "Emma loves her mother very much. She talks about her constantly. She mentions things they did together, going to the park, reading books, baking cookies. She seems genuinely happy and secure." During Hornsby's cross-examination, he attacked Mrs. Rodriguez's expertise, suggesting that daycare teachers weren't trained in detecting subtle forms of abuse or neglect. He implied that Mrs. Rodriguez might simply not be observant enough, or that Emma might be a good actress who hid her true feelings at school. It was subtle psychological warfare, and it was working. The judge's expression suggested doubt creeping into his mind. Then Elizabeth made the decision that would change everything. "Your Honor, I would like to call Emma Mitchell to the stand," Elizabeth announced. The courtroom fell silent. Even Hornsby looked surprised. It was unusual to call such a young child to testify, and the strategic wisdom of it was questionable. A court officer gently guided Emma into the courtroom. The little girl looked impossibly small in the formal setting, her pink dress and white tights making her appear even younger than 3 years old. Sarah's heart clenched as she watched her daughter walk toward the witness stand, completely unaware of the magnitude of what was about to happen. Emma was sworn in, the court officer asking her to promise to tell the truth, a concept that a 3-year-old could only partially comprehend. Emma nodded solemnly, her small hand raised as if she understood the gravity of the oath. Elizabeth approached her gently, her demeanor shifting to something softer, less aggressive than her courtroom persona. "Hello, Emma," Elizabeth said warmly. "Do you know who I am?" "You're the nice lady," Emma said, her voice small but clear. "You came to my house." "That's right, I'm here to help your mommy. Is that okay?" Emma nodded. "Emma, I want to ask you some questions about your mommy. Is that okay?" "Okay," Emma said, swinging her legs beneath the witness stand. "Does your mommy love you?" Yes, Emma said without hesitation. Mommy loves me so much. She tells me every day. What does your mommy do that shows you she loves you? She reads me stories, Emma said, her face brightening. She makes me breakfast. She tucks me in at night. She sings to me. She plays with me. She takes me to the park. Does your mommy ever leave you alone? Emma frowned, considering the question seriously. Sometimes she goes to work, but Grandma stays with me, or Daddy picks me up. Does it make you feel scared when your mommy goes to work? No, Emma said, because I know she comes back. She always comes back. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as she listened to her daughter describe their life together with the simple, pure honesty that only children possessed. Emma wasn't trying to be persuasive or strategic. She was simply telling the truth as she experienced it. Then Elizabeth asked a crucial question. Emma, has anyone told you to say bad things about your mommy? Emma's expression changed. She became very still, and her eyes darted nervously toward Marcus. It's okay to tell the truth, Elizabeth said gently. Who told you to say bad things? Daddy, Emma said quietly. He said Mommy was mean, but she's not mean. He said I should tell the judge that Mommy is mean, but that's not true. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. The judge banged his gavel sharply. Order, I will have order in this courtroom. What did your daddy say your mommy did that was mean? Elizabeth asked, her voice gentle but steady. He said she yelled at me, Emma said, her lower lip trembling. But she doesn't yell, she's never yelled at me. Daddy yells sometimes, but not Mommy. Sarah's hands covered her mouth. Emma was breaking down the entire narrative that Marcus had constructed, dismantling it piece by piece with her childish honesty. Did your daddy or anyone else tell you to say these things? Elizabeth pressed. Yes, Emma said, tears now streaming down her face. Daddy and the lady, Patricia. She came to Daddy's house and they talked about what I should say. Patricia said if I told the judge that Mommy was mean, then I could stay with Daddy and her. She said we could go to Disneyland. The courtroom went completely silent. Even the judge seemed to be holding his breath. Hornsby stood abruptly. Your Honor, I object to this line of questioning. The child is clearly being coached by the defense. Coached? Elizabeth's voice was sharp. Your Honor, this child is describing a conspiracy to manipulate her testimony. My client has been accused of coaching a witness, yet the evidence clearly shows that the petitioner and his witness have been doing exactly that to this child. The judge raised his hand. I will determine the admissibility of this testimony. Continue, Ms. Chen. Emma, Elizabeth said softly, do you want to live with your mommy? Yes, Emma said without hesitation. I want to live with Mommy. I love Mommy. Even though your daddy said your mommy was mean. Daddy was lying, Emma said, her 3-year-old logic cutting through all the legal complexity. Mommy is nice. Mommy is the nicest. I want to stay with Mommy. Hornsby's cross-examination was brutal. He attempted to plant doubt in Emma's mind, to suggest that her mother had told her what to say, to paint Elizabeth as the manipulator. But Emma remained consistent, her testimony anchored in the simple truth of her lived experience. She didn't understand legal strategy or custody implications. She only understood that she loved her mother and that her father had asked her to lie. When Emma stepped down from the witness stand, she ran directly to Sarah, who scooped her up and held her tightly, both of them crying. Margaret reached over and placed her hand on Sarah's back, offering silent support. But as Sarah held Emma, she noticed something shift in the courtroom atmosphere. The judge was no longer leaning back in his chair with neutral detachment. He was leaning forward, his expression intense, his eyes moving between Emma and Marcus with an intensity that suggested his perception of the case had fundamentally changed. Judge Morrison called for a 30-minute recess, announcing that he had significant concerns that needed to be addressed before the proceedings could continue. As Sarah carried Emma out of the courtroom, Officer Chen was waiting in the hallway. The moment Emma saw Duke, She broke into a smile through her tears. She reached out for the dog, and Sarah set her down gently. Emma immediately wrapped her arms around Duke's neck, burying her face in his fur. "You did so good, baby girl," Sarah whispered to her daughter. "You told the truth, that's all that matters." But even as Sarah praised her daughter's courage, a chill ran down her spine. Emma had just testified that Marcus had attempted to manipulate her into lying under oath. That was a serious allegation, one with potentially severe legal consequences. Would the judge believe that Marcus had done this? Would it be enough to outweigh Patricia's carefully constructed lies? Officer Chen approached Sarah, while Emma remained comforted by Duke. "That was remarkable," he said quietly. "I've been doing this for a long time, and I've never seen a child speak with such clarity and honesty." "But will it be enough?" Sarah asked desperately. The judge seemed impressed, but Patricia's testimony was so detailed, so credible. "Truth has a way of emerging," Officer Chen said cryptically. "Sometimes it just needs the right conditions." As the 30-minute recess drew to a close, Sarah felt a strange mixture of hope and terror. Emma had spoken the truth, had exposed Marcus's manipulation, had demonstrated her genuine love and connection to her mother. But the legal system was unpredictable, and Sarah had learned not to take anything for granted. She knelt down beside Emma, one last time before they returned to the courtroom. "Whatever happens next," Sarah said, looking directly into her daughter's eyes, "I want you to know how proud I am of you. You were so brave today. You told the truth, and that's the most important thing anyone can ever do." Emma nodded solemnly, her small hand reaching up to touch her mother's face. "I love you, Mommy," Emma said. "I want to stay with you forever." "I love you too, baby," Sarah whispered, "forever and always." As they stood to return to the courtroom, Sarah felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. The afternoon session would determine everything. The judge would make his decision, and their lives would never be the same. Judge Harold Morrison sat in his chambers during the 30-minute recess, his reading glasses perched on the bridge of his nose as he reviewed his extensive notes from the morning and afternoon sessions. His chambers were lined with law books, photographs of his family, and artifacts collected over 30 years of judicial service. He had presided over hundreds of custody cases, and he prided himself on his ability to discern truth from deception, genuine concern from manipulative performance. But this case was different. He removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes, a gesture that betrayed the weight he was carrying. What he had just witnessed in that courtroom was deeply troubling on multiple levels. A 3-year-old child had just provided testimony that directly contradicted the sworn statement of an adult witness. More than that, the child had alleged that the petitioner, the child's own father, had attempted to manipulate her testimony. Judge Morrison picked up the transcript from Patricia Davies' testimony and read through it again carefully. The statements were specific, detailed, and crafted in a way that suggested either genuine observation or careful preparation. He had seen enough custody cases to recognize the difference, and Patricia's testimony had the hallmarks of preparation, not crude coaching, but subtle, sophisticated preparation designed to sound authentic. He then read through the notes he'd made during Emma's testimony. The child had been remarkably consistent. She hadn't wavered or become confused under questioning. She had answered honestly about her relationship with her mother, and most damning, she had revealed that Marcus and Patricia had explicitly instructed her to lie. The judge leaned back in his leather chair and considered the behavioral evidence he had observed throughout the proceedings. This was the part of custody cases that couldn't be captured in transcripts or legal briefs, the subtle behavioral cues that indicated truth or deception. When Sarah had spoken about her relationship with Emma, her body language had been open, her tone had been genuine, her affect had matched her words. When she described Emma's bedtime routine, her eyes had softened with genuine affection. When she discussed the sacrifices she'd made for her daughter, there had been no performance quality to her emotion. It had been raw and real. In contrast, when Marcus had testified about his newfound commitment to fatherhood, Judge Morrison had observed several tells of deception. His eyes had shifted away from the judge at key moments. His hand movements had seemed rehearsed. Most tellingly, when discussing Emma specifically, his emotional responses had seemed slightly out of sync with what he was saying, as if he was performing the emotion he thought he should feel rather than genuinely feeling it. Patricia Davies had been more sophisticated in her deception, but Judge Morrison had observed one crucial moment that had planted seeds of doubt in his mind. When Elizabeth asked Patricia about her romantic relationship with Marcus, Patricia had hesitated, just slightly, just briefly, before acknowledging it. That hesitation had revealed the calculated nature of her performance. She was managing her story, curating her presentation, adjusting details based on how her testimony was being received. Emma, in contrast, had no such filters. A 3-year-old was incapable of sophisticated deception. Emma couldn't maintain a complex false narrative. She could only tell the truth as she understood it. Judge Morrison stood and walked to the window of his chambers, looking out over the Portland skyline. He thought about his own grandchildren, about the responsibility he felt to protect vulnerable children from being weaponized in custody disputes. He thought about the countless cases he'd presided over where parents had used children as pawns, attempting to manipulate young minds to serve their own selfish purposes. The implications of what had emerged in court today were serious. If Marcus had deliberately coached Emma to provide false testimony, that constituted perjury and conspiracy to commit perjury. If Patricia had participated in this coaching, she had committed perjury herself. These were criminal matters, not merely civil custody matters. Judge Morrison returned to his desk and picked up the phone. He called his clerk. "Contact the Portland Police Department," he said. "I need to speak with someone in the Criminal Investigation Division. We may have a situation involving felony perjury and coaching of a minor witness. And get me information on Patricia Davies, background check, criminal history, everything. I want it before we resume proceedings." He hung up the phone and sat back, his expression grave. In all his years on the bench, he had learned that the most important skill a judge could develop was the ability to read people. Not through what they said, but through how they presented themselves, how their body language aligned or misaligned with their words, how their emotional responses matched or contradicted their narratives. Sarah Mitchell had been terrified, but her terror had been genuine, the fear of a mother facing the possibility of losing her child. It was a fear that transcended performance. It was existential and authentic. Marcus Thompson and Patricia Davies, in contrast, had been performing. They had constructed narratives, practiced presentations, and created false evidence. And they had made the catastrophic mistake of attempting to recruit a 3-year-old into their conspiracy. When the clerk returned with the background check on Patricia Davies, Judge Morrison was not surprised by what he found. Patricia had been involved in 2 previous custody disputes, both times providing testimony against the mother. In both cases, the court had eventually discovered inconsistencies in her testimony. In one case, there was evidence that she had been paid by the father involved. The pattern was clear. Patricia Davies was a professional false witness, a woman who had made a career out of helping fathers take custody away from mothers through perjured testimony. Judge Morrison made another call, this time to the district attorney's office. He explained the situation and recommended an immediate investigation. By the time he was ready to resume proceedings, Judge Morrison had made several critical decisions. He would not simply rule on the custody matter. He would also issue criminal referrals for both Marcus Thompson and Patricia Davies. He would recommend that Emma undergo a comprehensive psychological evaluation, not because he believed there was anything wrong with her, but to create a formal record of her mental and emotional state, to document the absence of abuse or trauma. Most importantly, Judge Morrison had decided that he would use this case as an opportunity to send a message, not just to Marcus and Patricia, but to any parents or witnesses who might consider manipulating children or perjuring themselves in custody disputes. The law had teeth, and he intended to use them. As the courtroom filled again for the resumption of proceedings, Judge Morrison observed the participants carefully. Sarah sat rigidly, her hands clenched in her lap. Emma was being held by her grandmother in the gallery, the child's eyes occasionally glancing toward the hallway where Officer Chen and Duke remained. Margaret's expression was stern and protective. Marcus sat with Hornsby, and the attorney was clearly trying to manage the damage from Emma's testimony. Marcus's face had gone pale, and he was whispering urgently with his lawyer. Patricia Davies sat alone, having apparently been advised by Hornsby to separate herself from Marcus. She was no longer the composed, confident witness from the morning. Her hands were trembling slightly, and she avoided making eye contact with anyone. Judge Morrison took his seat and called the court back to order. "Before we proceed with closing arguments," Judge Morrison announced, "I want to address some matters that have come to my attention. I have serious concerns about the testimony provided in this court today. I have ordered an immediate background investigation into Ms. Patricia Davies, and I have also referred this matter to the District Attorney's Office for potential criminal investigation." Hornsby stood. "Your Honor, I object." "You may sit down, Mr. Hornsby," Judge Morrison said coldly. "This court has an obligation to ensure the integrity of proceedings, particularly when a child is involved. The allegations made by the minor witness are serious and warrant investigation." Judge Morrison turned his attention to Marcus. "Mr. Thompson, I must advise you that the testimony provided by your daughter suggests that you may have coached her to provide false statements to this court. I am instructing you not to discuss this case with Emma without the presence of a court-appointed guardian ad litem. Any violation of this order will result in immediate contempt charges." Marcus's face went completely white. His attorney put a hand on his arm, whispering urgently. Judge Morrison then addressed the entire courtroom, his voice carrying the weight of judicial authority. "I have been a judge for 30 years, he said. "I have presided over countless custody cases, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that I have just witnessed one of the most egregious attempts to manipulate a child and subvert the judicial process that I have encountered in my career. What I witnessed today was not concerned parenting seeking to protect a child. What I witnessed was criminal conspiracy." He paused, allowing his words to settle over the courtroom like a heavy blanket. The testimony provided by the minor witness, Emma Mitchell, was remarkable in its clarity and consistency. This child provided credible, authentic testimony regarding her relationship with her mother and her father's attempt to manipulate her. Her account has been corroborated by other witnesses and evidence presented to this court. Judge Morrison's gaze moved to Sarah. On the other hand, the testimony provided by Ms. Patricia Davies has been thoroughly discredited. The background investigation has revealed a pattern of similar conduct in other custody disputes. Ms. Davies appears to be a professional false witness who has made a career of assisting fathers in obtaining custody through perjured testimony. He turned to Patricia. "Ms. Davies, I am placing you under arrest for contempt of court and perjury. You will be taken into custody immediately." The bailiff stepped forward as Patricia's face crumpled. She began sobbing, her carefully constructed composure finally shattering. Judge Morrison then looked at Marcus. "Mr. Thompson, you will also be facing criminal charges related to coaching a minor witness and conspiracy to commit perjury. You are advised that anything you say can and will be used against you in both these civil proceedings and potential criminal proceedings." Hornsby was on his feet, objecting vociferously, but the judge's gavel came down with finality. "This court is taking a brief recess to allow law enforcement to take Ms. Davies into custody. We will resume to hear closing arguments in 15 minutes. As Patricia was led away by the bailiff, Sarah felt something shift inside her. The tide had turned. The truth, which had seemed so fragile and uncertain just hours before, was now being upheld by the authority of the court itself. Emma, seeing the commotion, looked frightened. Sarah immediately went to her and lifted her into her arms. "It's okay, baby," Sarah whispered. "You did everything right. You told the truth and the judge heard you." Officer Chen appeared in the doorway, Duke at his side. The dog seemed to sense the shifting emotions in the room. He approached Sarah and Emma gently, and Emma reached out to touch him, finding comfort in his steady presence. Judge Morrison watched this interaction from his elevated position, and for the first time that day, his stern expression softened slightly. He understood in that moment the power of truth and the resilience of genuine love. The second half of this custody case was about to unfold, but its outcome had already been determined by a 3-year-old girl's courage and a German shepherd's quiet support. Detective Marcus Rivera sat in the Portland Police Department's Criminal Investigation Division, his desk cluttered with case files and coffee cups. He had been with the department for 18 years, and he'd seen enough human manipulation and deception to fill several lifetimes. When Judge Morrison's referral came across his desk, marked with urgent priority, Rivera knew he was about to open a can of worms that would have far-reaching consequences. The judge's memo was detailed and damning. It outlined allegations that Marcus Thompson and Patricia Davies had conspired to manufacture false testimony in a custody hearing, and that they had attempted to coach a 3-year-old child to lie under oath. These were serious felonies: conspiracy, perjury, child manipulation. The judge had also recommended that the department investigate Patricia Davies' background for patterns of similar conduct in other cases. Rivera assembled a team immediately. They would need to obtain warrants, conduct interviews, gather evidence, and build a case that could withstand legal scrutiny. The fact that a judge had referred the matter gave them significant leverage, but they would still need solid evidence. The first break came when one of Rivera's detectives, Sarah Wong, discovered something significant in Patricia Davies' apartment. Armed with a search warrant, they found a notebook, several notebooks actually, filled with handwritten notes. The content was shocking in its explicitness. There were phrases Marcus had allegedly instructed Patricia to use in her testimony-specific incidents she was supposed to describe, even notes about how to modulate her voice and when to appear emotional. One passage read, "Marcus says to emphasize the left alone incident multiple times. Judge responds better to that than erratic behavior. Also need to cry when talking about Emma's safety. Genuine concern is more credible than anger." Another entry documented Marcus's coaching sessions. "Marcus came over at 8 p.m. We practiced my testimony for 2 hours. He helped me organize the stories in chronological order so they sound more believable. He kept saying, 'Make it sound like you're reluctant to say these things, like you really don't want to hurt Sarah, but you have to protect Emma.' He's very good at this." The most incriminating entry was dated 3 weeks before the custody hearing. "Marcus paid me $5,000 today for providing testimony. He said there might be more if I'm convincing. He also promised that once he gets custody of Emma, we can move in together and I can help raise her. He wants a normal family. This is actually working out better than I expected." Rivera felt a chill run down his spine as he read these notes. This wasn't a case of a concerned girlfriend reluctantly coming forward with observations. This was a calculated criminal conspiracy, a woman who had been explicitly paid to commit perjury, who had deliberately falsified testimony to help manipulate a child custody case. Detective Wong had also obtained Patricia's phone records and financial statements. The records revealed multiple payments from Marcus Thompson's bank account to Patricia Davies over the past 6 months, small amounts that appeared to be disguised as various things: groceries, rent assistance, loan repayment. But that, when added together, totaled nearly $15,000. More significantly, The phone records showed constant communication between Marcus and Patricia in the weeks leading up to the custody hearing, text messages that had been deleted but recovered from the phone company's servers. The text messages were a goldmine of evidence. Marcus had been extremely explicit in his instructions to Patricia. Remember, you need to sound credible. Don't exaggerate. Small, specific incidents are more believable than big, dramatic claims. Make sure you mention at least 3 separate incidents. Multiple examples make the pattern seem real. When they ask if you've reported her to CPS, say that I wanted to handle it through the courts instead. That makes you sound protective and thoughtful rather than vindictive. Practice crying. The judge needs to see genuine emotion. If you can make yourself tear up, it will be very effective. Patricia had responded with updates about her preparation. I've memorized the main incidents. I'm practicing my delivery. I watched some YouTube videos on how to appear credible in court. I think I'm ready. Most damning was this exchange from 2 days before the hearing. Marcus, are you nervous about testifying? Patricia, a little. What if they ask me questions I'm not prepared for? Marcus, just stick to the main stories. If they ask something unexpected, pause and think before answering. That makes you seem thoughtful rather than scripted. And remember, you're doing this for Emma. You're the voice for a child who can't protect herself. That's your motivation, not us, not money. Always about protecting Emma. Patricia, got it. I'm ready to do this for Emma and for us. While Rivera was building the financial and communications case against Marcus and Patricia, another detective, James Wu, was investigating Patricia's history in other custody disputes. What they found was a clear pattern of predatory behavior. In a case from 4 years earlier, Patricia had provided testimony in a custody hearing between a divorced couple named David and Jennifer Martinez. Patricia had sworn that she'd witnessed Jennifer leaving their 3-year-old son alone in a car for extended periods. The judge had been skeptical enough to order an investigation, which revealed that Patricia's testimony was fabricated and that she had been dating David for 6 months, a relationship she hadn't disclosed to the court. In another case from 3 years ago, Patricia had testified against a mother named Amanda Chen, claiming to have witnessed neglectful and inappropriate behavior. This testimony had nearly cost Amanda her custody, but a persistent family law attorney had dug deeper and discovered that Patricia had been compensated by the father for her testimony. There was even a civil lawsuit filed against Patricia by one of her previous victims, a mother who had lost custody based partly on Patricia's false testimony. The lawsuit had been settled out of court, with Patricia agreeing to pay a confidential settlement amount, which strongly suggested admission of wrongdoing. The pattern was undeniable. Patricia Davies was a professional false witness who specialized in assisting fathers in custody battles by providing perjured testimony against mothers. She had made a lucrative career out of it, targeting vulnerable men who wanted custody of their children and were willing to pay for false testimony. Detective Rivera compiled all of this evidence into a comprehensive report. The evidence was overwhelming. Financial records showing payment for perjury, notebooks detailing coaching instructions, text messages coordinating false testimony, phone records establishing constant communication between the co-conspirators, and a clear pattern of similar conduct in previous cases. He also requested that the department launch a formal investigation into Marcus Thompson's background. What they discovered was equally troubling. Marcus had a history of manipulation in his personal relationships. 2 of his previous girlfriends had filed restraining orders against him, citing harassment and emotional abuse. One of them had also been involved in a custody dispute several years earlier, a dispute in which Marcus had attempted to gain custody of a child from a different relationship, allegations that had ultimately been dismissed due to insufficient evidence. The pieces of the puzzle were coming together in a comprehensive picture of calculated manipulation and criminal conspiracy. Marcus Thompson had clearly learned from his previous unsuccessful attempt to weaponize a custody dispute. This time, he had been more careful, more strategic, and more willing to pay for false testimony. Rivera also conducted interviews with neighbors of both Marcus and Patricia. One neighbor reported seeing Patricia at Marcus's house on numerous occasions, including several nights during the period when she was supposed to be making her observations of Sarah's parenting for the custody case. Another neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Chen, no relation to the other Chens involved in this case, provided a crucial piece of evidence. She reported that she had seen Patricia coaching Emma on Marcus's front porch approximately 4 weeks before the custody hearing. Patricia had been asking Emma questions like, "What does mommy do that makes you scared? And does mommy ever yell at you?" And then instructing Emma on how to answer. "You should tell the judge that mommy yells a lot. That's very important. Can you remember that?" Mrs. Chen had been disturbed by what she witnessed and had almost come forward on her own. The fact that she now had formal law enforcement asking about this gave her the opportunity to finally report it. As Rivera compiled the final report, he reflected on the gravity of what had been uncovered. This wasn't just a case of a dishonest witness trying to help a friend. This was an organized, premeditated criminal conspiracy involving child manipulation, perjury, and fraud. Marcus Thompson and Patricia Davies had deliberately attempted to subvert the judicial process for personal gain, and they had been willing to damage a child's relationship with her mother to do it. The report concluded with recommendations for criminal charges: perjury, conspiracy to commit perjury, child endangerment, attempted fraud against the court, and payment for false testimony. It was a comprehensive indictment of calculated criminality. When the report was delivered to the district attorney's office, the prosecutor assigned to the case, a seasoned trial lawyer named David Kraft, reviewed it with growing horror. In his 15 years of practice, he had rarely seen such clear evidence of conspiracy. He immediately began preparing charges. But before he could proceed, something unexpected happened. Marcus Thompson's attorney, David Hornsby, contacted the DA's office with a stunning announcement. Marcus was prepared to enter a guilty plea to all charges if the district attorney would agree to a reduced sentence, and would recommend that the judge consider his cooperation as a mitigating factor. Hornsby explained that Marcus wanted to protect Emma from further legal proceedings, from having to testify again in a criminal trial. He was willing to accept criminal responsibility if it meant sparing his daughter the trauma of extended judicial involvement. The district attorney's office accepted the plea agreement, seeing it as a practical resolution that would serve the interests of justice and the child's well-being. Patricia Davies, however, refused to cooperate. She maintained her innocence and insisted on going to trial, despite the overwhelming evidence against her. She hired a defense attorney and began preparing her defense, which would essentially rely on claiming that her testimony had been truthful and that Judge Morrison had been biased against her. As the legal machinery ground forward, Sarah Mitchell sat in her attorney's office, reading through the evidence that had been compiled against Marcus and Patricia. She felt a complex mixture of vindication and sadness. Marcus's willingness to enter a guilty plea meant that Emma wouldn't have to relive the courtroom experience in a criminal trial, and for that, Sarah was grateful. But the reality of what Marcus had done, the deliberate attempt to manipulate their daughter, the criminal conspiracy, the willingness to pay for false testimony, it all represented a profound betrayal of the trust Sarah had tried to maintain for Emma's sake. Elizabeth Chen placed a reassuring hand on Sarah's shoulder. "The evidence is overwhelming," Elizabeth said. "Marcus knows he's defeated. His guilty plea essentially concedes that Emma was telling the truth. The judge will have all the confirmation he needs to make his custody ruling." Sarah nodded, though she felt little triumph. All she could think about was protecting Emma from further trauma and rebuilding their life together in the wake of this nightmare. The legal system, for once, had worked the way it was supposed to. Truth had emerged, lies had been exposed, and a child's genuine testimony had been validated by concrete evidence. But the real victory, Sarah realized, would be in the quiet, ordinary moments ahead, reading bedtime stories with Emma, watching her grow and thrive, and knowing that her daughter had been protected from manipulation and psychological harm. The courtroom was packed on the day of Judge Morrison's final ruling. Word had spread through the legal community about the case, a custody battle that had uncovered a criminal conspiracy, a 3-year-old girl whose testimony had exposed lies, and a judicial system that had ultimately served justice. The Portland Oregonian had run a story about the case, titled, "How a Child's Truth Exposed a Criminal Plot," and it had resonated with people who had witnessed or experienced similar custody disputes. Sarah sat at the plaintiff's table with Elizabeth beside her. Emma was in the gallery with her grandmother Margaret, who had been holding the child's hand throughout the entire ordeal. Officer James, Chen, and Duke sat in the back of the courtroom. The dog had become something of a mascot for the case, and the judge had permitted him to remain for the final proceedings, recognizing his role in Emma's emotional stability. Marcus sat with his new attorney. Hornsby had wisely stepped away from the case once it became clear that Marcus was going to plead guilty. His new lawyer, a woman named Patricia Goldstein, had advised him to appear remorseful and humble. Marcus wore a plain gray suit and kept his eyes down, avoiding eye contact with Sarah. Patricia Davies was absent from the courtroom. She had refused to appear voluntarily and had sent her defense attorney to represent her interests. The attorney, a man clearly struggling with the ethical implications of defending an indefensible client, sat at a nearby table with papers arranged before him. Judge Morrison entered, and everyone rose. The judge took his seat, his expression grave and contemplative. He had spent considerable time reviewing the evidence, the psychological evaluations of Emma, the investigation reports, and the testimonies provided. What he was about to announce would set precedent and would serve as a cautionary tale about the dangers of weaponizing children in custody disputes. This court has completed its review of the evidence presented in the matter of Thompson v. Mitchell, Judge Morrison began, his voice carrying through the courtroom. I will now render my decision. He paused, allowing the weight of the moment to settle over the room. First, I want to address the criminal aspects of this case. It is abundantly clear to this court that the petitioner, Marcus Thompson, engaged in a calculated conspiracy to manufacture false testimony and to manipulate his minor daughter in order to gain custody through fraudulent means. The evidence presented by the district attorney's office, combined with the testimony heard in this courtroom, establishes beyond any reasonable doubt that Mr. Thompson paid for false testimony, coached a witness to commit perjury, and deliberately instructed his 3-year-old daughter to provide false statements to this court. Judge Morrison's expression hardened. While I commend Mr. Thompson for accepting criminal responsibility through his guilty plea, I want to be absolutely clear. This court does not view such pleas as mitigation for conduct that strikes at the very heart of judicial integrity and child welfare. The manipulation of a minor child for the purpose of subverting court proceedings is among the most egregious acts a parent can commit. He turned his attention to the custody matter. Regarding the custody dispute itself, the evidence overwhelmingly demonstrates that Sarah Mitchell is a devoted, loving mother who has dedicated herself entirely to the well-being of her daughter, Emma. The testimony provided by Ms. Mitchell, corroborated by her mother, Emma's daycare teacher, and most significantly by Emma herself, establishes that Emma is safe, healthy, emotionally secure, and deeply bonded to her mother. Sarah felt tears beginning to stream down her face as she heard the judge's words validate everything she had fought for. The minor child, Emma Thompson, provided the most credible testimony in this entire proceeding, Judge Morrison continued. A 3-year-old child, unable to understand the complexities of custody disputes, unable to comprehend the advantages of deception, simply told the truth about her relationship with her mother. She testified that her mother loves her, cares for her, and provides her with a safe and nurturing home. She also testified, with remarkable clarity for her age, that her father had attempted to convince her to lie about her mother. This testimony, from the most vulnerable and therefore most credible witness in this case, is the foundation upon which this court bases its custody decision. Judge Morrison consulted his notes. Therefore, this court orders as follows. Sarah Mitchell shall retain sole legal and physical custody of Emma Thompson. Marcus Thompson shall have supervised visitation only, contingent upon his completion of psychological evaluation and counseling. No unsupervised contact between Mr. Thompson and Emma shall be permitted until a court-appointed psychologist determines that such contact would not be harmful to the child. Additionally, Mr. Thompson shall pay enhanced child support to account for the emotional and psychological services that Emma may require as a result of his attempts to manipulate her. Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her so powerfully that she thought she might faint. She had won. Emma would remain with her. The nightmare was finally ending. Furthermore, Judge Morrison continued, this court is issuing a formal statement regarding Ms. Patricia Davies and her pattern of conduct. Ms. Davies has been identified as a serial perjurer who has engaged in similar conduct in at least 2 previous custody disputes. She has accepted payment for false testimony and has systematically targeted vulnerable mothers in custody cases. This court is referring her case to the State Bar Association for investigation and possible revocation of any professional licenses she may hold. This court is also recommending that the district attorney's office consider enhanced charges related to her pattern of criminal conduct. The judge looked directly at Patricia's attorney. Ms. Davies' defense strategy appears to rely on claiming that her testimony was truthful and that this court is biased. I want to be absolutely clear for the record. Ms. Davies' testimony was false, deliberately false, and knowingly false. The evidence supporting this conclusion is overwhelming and irrefutable. Any suggestion that this court's findings are based on bias rather than evidence is both offensive and demonstrably incorrect. Judge Morrison then addressed the broader implications of the case. I want to use this case as an opportunity to speak to everyone involved in family law, whether as parents, attorneys, or professionals, he said. Custody disputes are extraordinarily painful for everyone involved, particularly for the children at the center of these disputes. I understand that parents sometimes feel desperate, that they believe their former partners are unfit or dangerous. But the answer to those concerns is not to manufacture false evidence or to manipulate children into providing false testimony. The answer is to work within the legal system, to present truthful evidence, and to allow the judicial process to work as it is designed to work. He paused, his gaze moving to Marcus. When parents attempt to corrupt this process, when they weaponize their children, when they pay for false testimony, they are not only committing crimes, they are causing profound psychological harm to the very children they claim to be protecting. Children are incredibly perceptive. They sense manipulation. They internalize the message that lying is acceptable if it serves parental interests. And most tragically, they learn not to trust their own perceptions and experiences of reality. Judge Morrison's voice grew quieter but more intense. The child in this case has demonstrated remarkable resilience and honesty, but she has also experienced trauma. She has had to sit in a courtroom and testify that her father lied about her mother. She has learned that an adult she trusted was willing to manipulate her for his own purposes. She will carry this experience with her for the rest of her life. He looked at Marcus. I hope, Mr. Thompson, that you will take this opportunity during your psychological evaluation and counseling to truly understand the damage you have caused, not just to Sarah Mitchell, but to your daughter. Children are remarkably forgiving, and Emma may, in time, be able to rebuild some relationship with you. But that will only be possible if you genuinely accept responsibility for your actions and commit to changing your behavior. Judge Morrison then turned his attention to the courtroom at large. I also want to commend the professionals who brought this conspiracy to light, he said. Officer James Chen and his partner Duke, the comfort animal in this case, provided invaluable support to Emma during her testimony. The police detectives who investigated the criminal aspects of this case provided thorough and professional work. The district attorney's office pursued justice with integrity. And Sarah Mitchell's attorney, Elizabeth Chen, demonstrated exceptional legal advocacy on behalf of her client. Elizabeth squeezed Sarah's hand gently. "This court is adjourned," Judge Morrison said, bringing his gavel down with a sense of finality that echoed through the courtroom. For a moment there was silence. Then Sarah stood, and Emma, seeing her mother rise, broke free from her grandmother's grip and ran across the courtroom toward Sarah. Sarah scooped her daughter up and held her tightly, both of them crying, Sarah with relief and vindication, Emma with the simple joy of being reunited with her mother after a frightening experience. Margaret embraced both of them, her own tears flowing freely. Elizabeth stood and placed her hand on Sarah's back, acknowledging the victory they had achieved together. Officer Chen approached slowly, Duke at his side. Emma reached out from her mother's arms to touch the dog's head one final time. "You did it," Officer Chen said to Sarah, his voice warm. "You and Emma, you told the truth and the truth prevailed." "I couldn't have done it without you," Sarah said, extending her hand to Officer Chen. "Duke gave Emma courage when she needed it most. I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to," Officer Chen replied. "This is what Duke and I do. We help people find their way to the truth." Marcus was led out of the courtroom by court officers. He didn't try to speak to Sarah or Emma. He simply accepted the reality of his defeat and his legal consequences. That evening, Sarah and Emma sat on their couch at home, a space that suddenly felt infinitely safer and more precious than it had before. Emma was curled against her mother, exhausted from the emotional intensity of the day. "Mommy," Emma said softly. "Yes, baby. Are we okay now?" Sarah held her daughter closer, breathing in the sweet scent of her hair, feeling the weight of her small body against hers. "Yes, Emma," Sarah said. "We're okay now. We're more than okay. We're home and we're together, and that's all that matters." "I liked Duke," Emma said. "He was nice." "He was very nice," Sarah agreed. "He helped you be brave." "I was scared," Emma admitted. "But you were there and Duke was there, and the judge listened." Sarah felt fresh tears slide down her cheeks. Out of the mouths of babes came such profound wisdom. Emma had understood in her 3-year-old way the essential truth. When you tell the truth, when you have people who support you, when you have the courage to speak your reality, justice becomes possible. The weeks and months that followed were devoted to healing. Emma saw a child psychologist twice weekly, processing her experience of being manipulated and coached. Sarah continued therapy to address her own trauma from the custody battle and the betrayal by Marcus. Margaret provided constant support and presence. And slowly, gradually, their lives began to normalize. Emma returned to her daycare with renewed happiness. Sarah returned to her freelance design work. The constant anxiety that had characterized their lives for months began to recede. 6 months after the final ruling, Sarah received a letter from Officer James Chen. He was retiring from the police department after 28 years of service. He wanted to thank Sarah for allowing him and Duke to be part of her case. It had reminded him why he had chosen to do this work in the first place. The letter concluded, "Duke and I have worked hundreds of cases together, but I will never forget Emma. That little girl, in her honesty and courage, taught all of us about the power of truth. I hope you and Emma will have a beautiful life together." Sarah framed the letter and hung it on the wall of her home office, a reminder of the power of telling the truth. the importance of standing up for what's right, and the incredible impact that even one act of courage, from a 3-year-old girl and a German shepherd, could have on the pursuit of justice. Emma grew up knowing her story, not as a source of shame or trauma, but as evidence of her own strength and the strength of the bond between her and her mother. She understood that she had been brave, that she had told the truth when it mattered most, and that sometimes the smallest voices in a courtroom can echo the loudest. And whenever she thought about that day in court, Emma remembered Duke, the calm, steadfast presence who had helped her find her courage when she needed it most.